Welcome to the Revolution Church podcast.
Hello everyone and welcome to Revolution. So I don't think we've talked since the attempt on Donald Trump's life, which was obviously a horrific thing. But also it's strange to hear politicians say that we don't practice violence. We don't do violence here. When you see all these Palestinian families being blown up every day and knowing that the United States and the Democratic Party I've been part of most of my life, are sending bombs over there. So we do practice violence, and it's heartbreaking to see. I'm anti-violence and anti-war completely. So anyhow, that's always been on my heart to see that type of stuff stop. And it's weird to see people's postures in a time like this. What people are worried about. I see a lot of people that seem to be more worried about themselves than they are thousands of people dying, horrible deaths at our hands, paid for by our taxes. So that's disturbing, because I think we should be better than that. It's wild to see how completely honest it is. It's how hard it is to be completely honest and transparent when people are insecure during a political season. And then the fact that people will try to destroy you if you don't agree with them politically on one side or the other. So much hypocrisy in this world right now. It really is. It's exhausting. It's really exhausting. So that's that. I wasn't able to speak on that last week, and I wanted to mention the what happened with Donald Trump and then the attempted assassination, but also bring it back to the fact that as Americans we have a lot of blood on our hands, unfortunately. Yeah, I mean, it's not just some lives, it's all lives, and I guess that would be, you don't want to say all lives matter, but it's just human life matters and humans matter, and peace and having conversations and negotiations and things like that rather than bloodshed are what we're called to. I mean, even Christianity, the first, I think at least 200 years, but 400 years was a nonviolent religion. And even Christians will get taxed more because they refuse to fight for the government. So it's wild how things change. Anyway, hey, listen, don't forget, if you do like what we're doing, don't forget to like and subscribe. You can also put on the notice here, so if you want to get a notice when we turn this thing on, when we fire up the flux capacitor and the revolution machine begins. Let's see if we can get a better view of the background here. Do that, like and subscribe. I know I'm saying that, and I've got all these people listening on the podcast. So, but if you are on the podcast, hey, you can review us and leave a 5-star review. That would be really great. On the different podcast places we're at, I know they have areas for reviews and stuff. So that's also another way to help our work. So here we are, folks. Yesterday was 17 years since I lost my sweet, sweet mama. And I will tell you what, yesterday was a really, really hard day. The anniversary of my mother's death is always extremely tough on me. Even when I've not known what day it was, I've had like these really tough times. And then all of a sudden you realize, oh, it's July 20th. Very tough time. Yesterday was just kind of almost just like a waste of a day. I really just laid around and just felt sad. My mother was really life to me, and when my mom passed away, I tell you what happened. My mom had colon cancer, and so make sure you get your colons checked. But my mom had colon cancer, and she survived a lot longer than most people thought. I mean, she survived over 8 or 9 years. But when it came back the last time, and it went stage 4, and it was in her throat and her lungs and all that, it was really tough. Unfortunately, my marriage at the time was falling apart too, so I didn't get to spend as much time with my mom at the end of her life because of that. But I remember my mom had done Larry King that night, and my mom had done Larry King that night before, and I was going to fly up that night, but she couldn't finish the interview, so she asked me to do the interview for her. She said, "Hey, would you go finish the Larry King interview?" Roe asked me, he said, "Your mom wants you to do this," and I'm like, "Well, I'd rather just come see Mom. It sounds like she's really sick." And they said, "She really wants you to, finish the interview so they have, enough stuff to air." I was like, "Okay, I'll go on." And I mean, Larry King's, one of his studios was right down the street from where I lived, so I just jumped on the train and went over there and did the interview and got a flight first thing in the morning. They said, "We'll get you a flight first thing in the morning." And so I was getting up, got ready, got everything together, and was sitting on the stoop of my apartment in Bedford, and waiting for a car to come take me to the airport. You take cars or cabs, whatever you can, but cars you can call, and they're always like 5 minutes. They're always 5 minutes away. I don't know how they do it, but they're always 5 minutes away. And so I'm sitting there, and I get a call from Roe, and he just says, "Your mom died." And then I was just in shock. And then my sister calls and says, "Your mom's died." And I said, "Okay, mom's died." And I'm like, "All right, well, I'm on my way there." And then someone with my sister's with her, like, "Did you hear what she said? Your mom died." And I was like, yeah. I said, I just can't react emotionally right now. I said, because I have to be on a plane for 2 hours. And I said, if I start to let this hit me the way it is, if I start to cry right now, I'm going to be a mess on there in the airport and on the airplane. And we didn't really want to let anybody know what was happening. We didn't want to have a funeral right away because we knew it would be a fiasco, and those Baptist people had threatened to. The Baptists? Yeah, I think so. The anti-gay people who protest the funerals, they said they would protest Mom's funeral. So we just didn't want to let anybody know what was going on. So we didn't even release Mom's death until after the funeral, which was just within 20 hours. We had her cremated and had a funeral for her. But yeah, it was devastating. I never saw my mom's body, just because to me my mom was life, and I wanted to keep the last memories with her. I had my beard, and she kissed me, and she goes, "Oh, your beard's so tickly," and but my mom was always so much full of life, and I guess that's clear in how much I mourn her on the anniversary of her death every year. It really does feel fresh. Unfortunately, the first couple years I didn't really mourn my mom like I needed to, and that led to some really bad problems. So I always recommend people really mourn as soon as you can. Yeah. But my mom was a wonderful person, and obviously she has a legacy. She's films made about her. She's got a Broadway show made by Elton John coming out in October. She left her mark. She left her mark of loving people, and she was known by who she loved. And I love that, because I love that It always reminds me of that Jesus at the Last Supper, and he goes, I want to give you a new commandment. And then he says, love each other. I really want you to love each other. And he goes, the world will know you belong to me by your love for one another. And, even when I posted up some stuff yesterday about my mom, her headstone, which I've never seen in person, to be honest with you. But the headstone and all this stuff. I've been to the grave, but before we had the stone. And, sorry, I'm out of it. I'm really out of it. I'm still kind of just in that moment of missing her and talking about her, and I don't get a chance to talk. I do talk about her, but just really feel in it right now. But yeah, she was, but people know her because she loved people, and she cared about people, and she forgave people, and set an example. And people always wonder, like, well, you got this ministry of grace, and I always didn't put two and two together, to be honest with you. I did grace for, like, Mom spoke at Revolution a few times. That was one of the things great about my mom, is even when I did stuff that was wild and crazy, she always stuck by my side, and she helped the church. She did she did an auction once where she auctioned off a bunch of her stuff to help do fundraisers for Revolution. I used to write postcards as thank you notes, and she had a bunch of these 5x7 cards with her picture on it, and she autographed a bunch. And so I would send out all these autographed pictures of my mom, as thank yous. She was always a big support of Revolution, and I'm always was grateful to have her in that, and be a part of that and encourage me. But I realized her love for people is really, like, for me, what it took me to understand her love for people was for me to understand what grace was. And that grace, like, because I always thought, like, the judgmental part of Christianity always kind of threw me off. And when I realized grace, that blew my mind, like, that I was accepted, because I thought I was the problem in the situation. And that blew my mind. And so I got that. And me and my mom always had great conversations, but she always loved people and forgave people. And she set such a good example for that, and she was always a light. Oh, and just watching, like, people, the responses people left on the comments. If you go to the Instagram and you look at the comments, or on the Facebook and you listen to the comments, I think I only got, like, one negative comment on strands or whatever that's called. And, but besides that, it's all been really positive stuff. And people saying, oh, she's a real Christian. She's what Christians should be. All this wonderful, really kind stuff. My mom wasn't perfect, but she did her best to really always include people, love people. Even when they said horrible things to her, she really did her best to just, I never saw her get mean with people, rarely ever. And if she did get upset, it would usually be to defend my dad, even after they were divorced, or myself, or my sister, like, she was, mama bear. But she was always so wonderful to people. And so I'm grateful for that legacy, and I'm grateful now that it's clear to me that the work I do is really a part of what she taught me to do, is to live a life of forgiveness and love people unconditionally. And sometimes you have to wait till you're gone for people to appreciate that, because I get pushback, especially during the political. It's so crazy how what we become as humans, what happens to our minds during political season, and what fear does to our minds and anger does to our minds. Because we celebrate all this, like, unconditional love, but then it comes to politics, and then all of a sudden unconditional love just goes right out the window. It's quite a bit to handle and see. And you start getting questions. Well, how could you love these people? How could you love those people? But anyway, I wanted to share a couple verses with you that I think my mom appreciated and liked and enjoyed, and just kind of talk about my mom a little bit. But I won't keep you guys too long today. Simply because I'm still just missing my mama today. But I'm going to go into the Psalms. One of the great things is I have a couple of my mom's Bibles, and I have this little red one, leather red one that she used to carry with her, and it's got all these little notes written in it, and it even has, like, a little drawing that I put in it probably when I was, like, 7 years old because I was bored at church, and little notes that she would take during talks, and her, sermons would highlight. It's really a treasure of mine. We also did I made a documentary with Helen Rollins and Pete Rollins and Vice, and I'm hoping that someone picks that up and buys that, because we did a whole documentary about my mom and my dad. He's in there too, for Vice magazine, and I really hope someone like a Netflix or HBO or something will pick that up. But anyway, Psalms 23. I wanted to read from Psalms 23. The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the darkest valleys, I really like when it says walk through the valley of death, because that's what we're reading, but we'll just go with darkest valleys. Even though I walk through the darkest valleys, I fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. And my mom had a really beautiful way of personalizing the scriptures, really taking them and embracing them for herself. Really like, and believing it for others, like almost believing for others on their behalf. She was like, she really believed that, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me wherever I go. And she showed that in her life. But what I love this, and I was thinking about this yesterday, is here in 5 where it says, you prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. And I think last week we talked about Jesus sitting with tax collectors and notorious sinners and all these things. I'm starting to feel like the Bible is a little bit like The Sopranos. You ever watch The Sopranos? And they're always eating. I'm always like, don't watch The Sopranos hungry, or you'll end up going and making pasta and going and trying to find gabagoo and all that kind of stuff. There are always meal sharing, always this covenant building with the food, because that's what they did. The biblical times in Jewish tradition was you shared a meal, you built a covenant together, a relationship. It was a sign to others that you were in covenant. And so it's like saying, like, even in the valley of death, even in our worst times, you prepare a table before me. Now, what happens at a table before your enemies? Do you go to war? Do you get violent? Do you stab them? You eat with them. You talk with them. You disagree with them. You have conversation with them. And even we can look back here in the Psalms of this, is the idea is that this is what this faith is calling us to. Is even in the tough times, I prepare a place before you with your enemies so you can have conversations with them, not so you destroy them, not so you kill them. I mean, we could find Old Testament verses that would back that kind of thing up. I believe the New Covenant takes away all that violence and all that eye for an eye stuff. And Jesus says it used to be an eye for an eye, but now I say, love your enemies, do good to your enemies, love those who persecute you. But you see a foreshadowing, if you want to say that here or not. I know that some people don't believe there's any foreshadowing. But you see that here with Christ, is this constantly sharing a table. You see that with Paul when he confronts Peter in Galatians. Why aren't you eating with? Why aren't you dining with the Gentiles? Why aren't you eating with these people? We're supposed to share meals together. This is, you're no better than anyone else. This is valuable. So here we're seeing this Psalm of David saying, even though I'm searched, even though I'm trying to be killed, even though I'm walking through the valley of darkness, the dark night of the soul, the valley of death, I will fear no evil because you are with me. And I think if we could allow this type of attitude to come into our world, into our lives, when we think of those people that we might have fear of trying to take away rights or not recognize our particular humanity or not recognize us as real Christians or whatever. Identity politics really makes things very messy often. But that we can put those things aside and come to the table and have discussions. And that we might be in fear, but we can sit down and we can rationalize well, and we can show love and show compassion, the type of compassion and love that Christ talks about, the type of love and compassion that Dr. King talks about, that John Hume talks about, that Gandhi talks about, that Bayard Rustin talked about. All these people who saw possibilities of what we could do. Now, does that mean we don't? Now, remember when we talked about loving your enemies, and Dr. King said, just be glad he didn't say like your enemies. So he's not saying when you sit with your enemies, you're liking them and you're going like, oh, I love what you're doing with that thing that's really affecting my whole life. No, I don't like that. But you love them enough to sit and recognize their humanity. And when we do sit down and share a meal or disagree or argue, well, there's this instant reaction of recognizing the other's humanity. They also recognize our humanity, and that's a big step. It's easy to be online and talk about people. It's easy to write articles, and it's easy to even try to legislate things until you're face to face with the people that you've legislated against, or that you've hurt against, that you've turned into the enemy. Another one of my mom's favorite verses was in Romans 8. And can you guys hear me okay, by the way? every minute I'm like, maybe the sound isn't working. But I'm sure you would tell me if the sound wasn't working, but I don't know, just paranoid. Little obsessive compulsive about things like that. Feel free to hit me up with a comment that says, we can hear you. Roger, Roger. So in Romans 8, and I always hear her say these verses out to people, and when she'd preach or when she'd be talking to somebody, she'd go, the Bible says we're more than conquerors. And I go, oh, that's adorable, Mom. As I was studying theology and philosophy and thinking like, oh, isn't her simplistic Christianity beautiful and so sweet, And now realizing that she really had the whole foundational idea of Christianity down there. Roger, Roger. Thank you. Roger, Roger. So Romans 8:31 says, what then are we to say about these things? If God is for us, who is against us? And I have to say a whole lot of damn people, it feels like sometimes. St. Paul. If God is for us, who is against us? He who did not withhold his own son, but gave him up for all of us. Will he not with him also give us everything else? Who will bring any charge against us? It is God who justifies. Who is to condemn? It is Christ Jesus who died, yes, who is raised, who is at the right hand of God, who indeed intercedes for us. Who will, and I love that intercedes, because I remember my mom would always talk about that. It was like, if Jesus is interceding, he's pulling for us. He's up there. He's our cheerleader, that type of thing. And you can laugh at that, but I don't laugh at that anymore. When you're poor and you're struggling and you're dealing with such a divisive world, you take what you can get, folks. You take that, It's funny what suffering does to your faith. It kind of, oh man, maybe that's not so crazy, Who indeed intercedes for us? Who will separate us from the love of Christ? Now listen to this. Who will separate us from the love of Christ? This is why I subscribe to Christianity, why Christianity is why the faith that I follow. It's verses like this. So listen to this, and it always blows my mind, because I feel like, who will separate us? I feel like everybody constantly in our lives is trying to separate us from the love of God, or from the love of Christianity, by telling us we're not the right kind of Christian. And I've seen this now start to go into, I feel like conservatives are a little bit like more accepting sometimes, like evangelicals and stuff. They're like, as long as you just like, you want to be in, you're in, as long as you do the right thing, don't be sinning. But like, you get into like progressive Christians, and they're always like, we want to make sure you're the right kind of progressive, or even just progressive. I've been a liberal my whole life, but there's always like, how liberal are you? We'll see. That kind of idea of like, are you liberal enough to be with us? And sometimes I always feel like, so there's always this kind of like divisive thing going on in our world, in our lives. And then you've got, we don't like that side, we don't like this side. But I feel like in my own crew, that liberalism is starting to feel more like Christianity, you know, where that idea of where we're the only, my mom and dad used to always say, and a lot of this was the same back in the 80s and 90s, might still be the same, but the Christians were the only army that killed their wounded, you know. And now I feel like on the left, it's like we often see, anytime I see like people in the left and people who follow, like pastors fall on the right, I see a lot of people on the left dance on their graves. And it really bothers me. And I try to bring it up to people and they will justify it in all their different ways. And I'm like, but this is just how the right justified it when pastors would fall and things like that as well. Like, it's just the same thing as you're just justifying, like you're dancing on people's graves, you're celebrating their failures. Well, I'm just worried about the victims. I'm like, well, then we need to reach out to the victims. You know, and we also need to remember that this person's family and their church are also could be victims as well. Like, how do we heal the victims? Like, if that's what we're really worried about the victims, it doesn't really, you know, celebrating this failure doesn't reach straight to the victim. How do we do that? You know, it's like really using the actual processes of caring for people rather than being like, oh, I'm just having my cake and eating it too, and I'll make it look like I'm a saint. And so there's always this thing of looking to separate one another, you know. And now it's like in the progressive world, it's like, you know, you got people who are like Joe Biden, no matter what. You got people who are like Joe Biden needs to step down. You got people who are like, oh, third party, you know what I mean? And these three, I watch argue all the time. It's like everybody's like trying to separate the other from the other, you know. We're always trying to see like who doesn't fit. Well, you know, you got to be. We're always wanting to be separate. And most of my life, I always felt like it was a sin management that did that, not if you were good enough. Well, I mean, it was if you were good, if you weren't doing certain sins. So this has always been the thing. But we were the only army that killed our wounded. And so the idea is if someone makes a mistake, if someone doesn't agree with you, if someone doesn't care about you, oh, wow, I didn't know that. Thank you, 810. I think WD-40. I'm sorry, your name just went poof. Oh, I didn't know that. I'll have to look at me, not following the news. Wow. Well, the world's gone mad then, folks. The world is going crazy, right? We're living in a wild time, but who's going to separate us from that? Will Donald Trump separate us from the love of God? No. Will the Democratic Party or the Republican Party separate us from the love of God? No. They will not do that. Will other Christians who don't like the way we do Christianity separate us from the love of God? No. That's why I have this little ring that says anarchy with a, maybe I should have gotten on a not skull ring, but I did it anyway because I'm punk rock. With the anarchy on grace, because grace covers us all. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. And I think this is why my mom loved this, and she always showed it. It's so funny, I bring up politics, and I watched all of our numbers go, doo, 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 doo. No one's watching anymore because they're mad at you. Even no followers will not separate us from the love of God. Being poor, being homeless, being sick, being ultra wealthy will not separate us from the love of God. But let's see what Paul says here. Who will separate us from this love of Christ? Will hardship? No. Distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or peril or sword? And this is written, for your sake we are being killed day long. We are counted as sheep to the slaughter. And I think there's a reason my mom loved this verse so much, especially in those years after we had the scandal. Is because it often felt like everybody wanted to see us fail. Lots of people danced on the graves of my parents, especially my father, and still do. I've had friends and stuff say horrific things about my family online, and then when I confront them, act like, who, me? You know, like, I'm just doing it because I'm righteous than them, you know. We're all judgmental bastards, you know. That's kind of like, we used to have this sticker that says, as Christians, we're sorry for being self-righteous, judgmental bastards. You know? And we also had another sticker that said, don't let your bastards get you down. I one time gave a pastor this, don't let the bastards get you down. He goes, and we might be the bastards. I'm like, oh yeah, don't forget this sticker. The apology is from us because we're all bastards. We all act at this at the time. We all act like we're not following Christ or something in the church, you know? Anyway. Will separate us from the love of Christ. None of this. And I think because my mom went through such hardship, you know, all those years visiting my dad in prison and seeing all the people that used to be around, not be around anymore. I mean, walking in the grocery store And we would see all these articles. I mean, there was all these crazy articles constantly about my family, about myself, about all the, in the Inquirer magazine and things like that. So it was like it was really tough. One of the really harsh things that was said yesterday was from this trans advocate who was saying your parents were, criminals and did all that, and it was really hurtful because you're seeing somebody who's been hurt and hurting back. Now, they took their comment down, and I was really grateful for that. But it was really hurtful because it's not one group. It's not like there's one group that doesn't like. That was the one thing about being scapegoated with my family and seeing that was it was never just the conservatives or the Democrats or but it was also late night comedy. It was also Time magazine. It was also Inquirer magazine. It was all these stuff. We were horrible people. Okay, we get it. How about another one? So that's, was very hard growing up as a kid, seeing that stuff and dealing with that stuff and watching my parents have to deal and go through that. So I think this is one of the reasons my mom really loved this sermon. Another person pushed back yesterday as I had put up one of the things I put up about my mom was a quote where she says, basically she said, too often the church is a courtroom and not a hospital. We're too judgmental. And this person's like, well, what do you think about these verses? And I'm like, first of all, I don't want to discuss theology on the day, on the anniversary of my mother's death. Read the room, probably not the best timing. But the other thing is like, when you're sitting there defending the right for the church to be judgmental and things like that, I'm like, the church has overreached on both sides of it with its judgment and its persecution and its killing its wounded and its pointing of fingers. Like, we've got that one down. But being in a hospital, like Jesus said when he got in trouble for sitting with tax collectors and notorious sinners like myself, when Jesus was sitting with those people, he goes, healthy people don't need doctors, sick people do. I've come to call sinners, not those who think they're good enough. So to me, we've always got, we've overstepped our judgmental. I think just as Christians, it's like we're known, that's kind of what we're known for. When we're supposed to be known for forgiveness, we're kind of more known for judgmental and what we're against rather than what we're for. And I think that's why my mom sticks out as she does. It's not just because she wore wild makeup and stuff like that. Even in the play they do about my mom, Elton John's on it, she doesn't wear that much makeup. I'm like, she doesn't really wear that makeup in the play. Like, I thought you guys would like really take it on. And they're like, well, we want people to catch who Tammy Faye was, not just makeup. She was this woman who loved people and cared about people and was a survivor and survived through all this. And that's another thing is a lot of times LGBTQ folks, especially gay men, will come up to me and say, why I love your mom is because she loved me so much, but also because she survived and she showed me how to survive. My mom used to sing the song, You Can Make It. And I remember one time hearing her preach. And she said, we used to say you can make it in faith. And she goes, now I can say you can make it from experience. You can make it. And that was really beautiful. And you look at this, and Paul's saying, and for your sake, we are being killed all day long. We are counted as sheep to slaughter. This is what Christians were going through at the time, literally being killed for their beliefs. Paul was eventually killed for being a Christian. 37 goes on to say, no, in all these things, we are more than conquerors. That's the one my mom loved. No, in all these things, we are more than conquerors through him who loved us. For I am convinced that neither death, nor life, nor angels, nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. One of the things I really like about the New Living Translation is that it says, not even the gates of hell will separate us from the love of God. And so when we talk about grace and we talk about love, I think this is a good place to remember. And I think my mom had it right. Is that, even when we're being killed, even when we're going through hardships, even when persecution is on top of us, I suffer from depression. So even when It says even nakedness, which I feel often because of not being literally naked, but because I struggle to pay my rent, struggle to make the bills due, and keep revolution going, all those things. But it still says through that we're more than conquerors, that nothing will separate us from that love of God. And so when we hear Paul Tillich's sermon on you are accepted, and you don't have to change, don't have to do anything. There's nothing you can do to be accepted. You are accepted, You see that here again. You see Paul referring to that. I think that's why Paul the Apostle is so important to Christianity. And I think if you skip Paul or you have an issue with Paul, you need to make peace with Paul, because Paul says a lot of great stuff about grace and never mentions hell, strangely enough. Isn't that weird? But in Paul's eyes, there's just no way to separate you from the love of God, and that's good news. That's extreme inclusion. And there's no shooting the wounded. There's no shooting those we disagree with. There's no that. It's always trying to give an answer with respect, tell the truth, but try to do it in love and not in haughtiness or haughtiness or being arrogant or proud or rude, but trying to be honest with people. And that's what nonviolence does too, because we can't just have peace without justice. We have to have justice as well. What is it? Martin Luther King said, "Injustice anywhere is or like slow to justice," or something about if we don't have injustice. Some group doesn't have injustice. I can't be what I should be until you are what you should be. Like if we can't just have justice for one group, we have to have justice for all groups. Justice for all. Interesting theory. So that was one of my mom's favorite verses. I actually read this this part of Romans at her funeral. When we did her memorial, unfortunately, the group that protests showed up and protested my mom's memorial service, and that was unfortunate. But also a legacy of that she loved everybody. If she would have been there, she would have gone out there and probably kissed them on the cheek and had a conversation with them. I gave them the middle finger because I was a grieving son. Sorry, Mom. I would just say this, one thing I want to encourage you guys is I haven't met quite anybody like my mom in ministry in all these years. And sometimes I don't even want to have anything to do with the church anymore. Honestly, it's such a struggle. Like I've been trying to get work within churches here in Seattle. It's so tough. It's working with other Christians is really tough. Sometimes I'm just like, maybe Revolution just needs to be something else. We can be like a non-church for people who can't handle that community or anything. But I have hope at the same time for the church that there will be change and that we will start to treat each other better and love each other more and love others more. But I haven't met anyone like my mother. I haven't met Christians who are too forgiving in a long time. They're just too forgiving. My parents I always thought were even my dad I thought was too forgiving at a time. And I haven't really ran into that in a long time where I'm like, they just show too much grace. I've been told I showed too much grace, but I think they were more worried about me giving a license to sin than forgiving people, because I preach grace because it's not always easy for me to give. I get really angry at people. I want to judge people. I will call people on the phone when I see them doing things that I feel like are sowing discord, but unfortunately I'm not saying graceful things. I'm saying like, hey, we need to change this because I want them to, because they're leaders, I want them to encourage them to show more grace. And sometimes I've got to remember that they deserve that grace as well. And so I'm not perfect. I don't have it all together. But, show as much grace as you can. Show as much love as you can. And at the same time, continue to fight for justice and equality. I think we have to live in an area of love and grace if we really do want to find unity through diversity. Because when you show diversity, you have to be tolerant for others, people's religions and faiths and sexualities and ideals and identities and all these things. But to love people and say, hey, we're not going to let that get in the way is important. It's kind of interesting because I've seen evangelicals lately do that with me. I've seen a few of my evangelical friends who've come out and support Revolution when they saw we had a need. And some like, I don't agree with you 100%, but I know you really love and care about people. And I hope that we can be a better example of that, of just loving people. And people go, oh, those guys love us too much. That that there won't have to be plays made about people like my mother, because she seemed to really love people in her own way. You know, that we'll all be seen like that. That we'll be more like Jesus, and more like Tammy Faye. We'll be more like, you know, Martin Luther Kings and Gandhis and Mother Teresa's and all those wonderful people. But yeah, that's my hope. Anyway, thanks for sitting with me today and kind of reflecting on my mother's life and mourning with me a little bit today. I appreciate it. Hey, listen, we're never at budget. We've been so behind on the budget this month. It's been crazy. We need to raise about $350 more, I think, to get to where we need. We really need to be there by Monday. If you can give, you can go to revolutionchurch.com, and the donations is at the top, and you can make a donation. It will really help us continue this work and do this work and take it to people all over the world like yourselves, and continue to do. I'm just doing more. I'm just trying to do more, but trying to keep the content quality. I don't want to just do content for content's sake, because, you know, there's a lot of pressure just to make more and do more. But I think often when we try to do that, we get caught up in this. We end up saying things that aren't helpful. And I want to make sure that the work of Revolution is helpful, and that it's helping build up people and encourage people. When it's encouraging people to change, it's not encouraging people to be perfect. It's just encouraging people to help find progress, not perfection, but progress in loving each other and accepting themselves and knowing that they are loved, so they can help other people know that they're loved. You know, this concept of bringing people together. Because I do think this ideas, these principles that are based on nonviolence and other things can change the world. But it takes time, and it actually takes practice. Like, we have to practice this thing, and it doesn't happen overnight. You know, when I look at the Civil War, the Troubles in Northern Ireland, I mean, it took John Hume 30 years of being involved and having tough conversations until they saw an end of the Troubles there, the end of that time, and found the peace process. So it does take time. But let's leave a better world for people. Let's leave a better place for people. Right? Because we're going into an insane time. So maybe you can be that glimpse of hope that someone needs right now, as like we're so politically divided, and that we're so religion divided, and we're so divided on, you know, on who we think we are, who we say we are, who, you know, identity politics have got us divided. Like we're going to be the hope in that. We can affirm people, but also say we got to affirm these people too, that we can show ways how to do that and be patient through that. So that's what I hope to do, and we'll continue to do. So if you would like to support our work, you can go to revolutionchurch.com and make a donation there. You can also share these talks. That really helps a lot. Let people know. Following us, liking, and subscribing really helps a lot, believe it or not. So there's all sorts of little things you can do. And like all the different little talks. If you see, you can go through and listen to them. I've been putting up these little vignettes, talks. All that helps us continue to grow and move forward and do this work. So thank you all so much. Thanks for, like, this is family to me. Like, I'm sitting down with you guys today and having this conversation and just sharing you, like, I miss my mom. And missing my mom, it wakes me up every day and makes me realize I got to do more to love people and show more grace to people. I hope I can do it, you know, in a kinder way every day. And I'm so grateful for all of you who are part of Revolution. Thank you all so much, and I will see you next week. But check in on the, I just got a new book called White Poverty. Interesting title, right? I'm going to talk about it probably a little bit this week on Instagram and things like that, and share that with you. You can Google that and see what that is about. It's really about the Poor People's Campaign, and really uniting people through poverty, interestingly enough. All right, thanks everybody. Be blessed. Have a great week. See you later. Viva la revolution.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed this podcast. To make your 100% tax-deductible donation today, please visit revolutionchurch.com/donate. You can also learn more by clicking the donate section on the website.